Y llegamos finalmente al momento tan esperado para el Container A.
Desde que arrancamos el día ya sabíamos que el horizonte era esta charla. Y al fin llegó, acá está.
Sí, antes que nada les vamos a comentar que la charla es en inglés, pero luego va a ser subida con los subtítulos, así que para aquellos que no sepan el idioma, la van a poder ver el día de mañana completa y subtitulada.
Nos dice la producción que ya está todo listo, pero antes de darle la bienvenida a la protagonista de este cierre de Nerdear la 101, invitamos
a Mariano. Mariano, ¿cómo estás? Bienvenido.
Todo bien.
Hola Mariano, ¿cómo andás?
Mariano va a estar entrevistando a nuestra última speaker.
Tan esperada, Tara, ¿no?
Tan esperada.
Tan esperada, sí, la verdad, re lindo, re lindo. Aprovechenlo, porque esto no pasa seguido. Traer este nivel de speakers es una linda oportunidad para aprender.
Y Marian, esta charla, ¿mañana dónde la podemos ver?
Obviamente va a estar subida en YouTube con los subtítulos, como ya habían dicho, así que, como siempre, va a estar todo disponible.
Y déjame rememorar un poco. Vos a Tara con Andrea ya la habías entrevistado, ¿verdad?
Sí, porque en la edición anterior de Nerdearla entrevistamos a todo el panel de Code Rush. Tara fue parte del proyecto de Code Rush, así que bueno, espero que se acuerde de mí.
Sí, seguro que sí, ¿por qué no? Además, escúchame, otra de las ediciones de Nerdearla, ¿cómo se va a olvidar?
Obvio. Lo que sí les recuerdo que las preguntas vayan poniéndolas en Swapcard. No importa que las pongan en inglés o en español, no hay problema, yo las traduzco, pero bueno, voy a hacer una pequeña intro en español, después todo en inglés.
Sí, hablando un poco de Tara, ella ha pasado casi 30 años desarrollando formas para que las empresas desarrollen y envíen software, ayudó a lanzar Mozilla y ha sido una firme defensora del código abierto.
Bandera del código abierto.
Sí, también cree que las empresas inteligentes entienden el valor comercial de tener una base de empleados diversa. Y trabaja actualmente en MongoDB.
MongoDB, chicos.
Es miembro de la junta directiva de Women Who Code y colaboradora de Continuous Delivery Foundation.
Devolverme los puntos Pretty, ¿no? También. Claro, obvio. Claro. Su trayectoria es inmensa, habrán visto. Ella nos contará más sobre su carrera y cómo inspira a jóvenes talentos a convertirse en su mejor versión.
Sí. Antes de la presentación vamos a hacer este pequeño video de un resumen, parte de su paso por el documental Code Rush que vimos al mediodía y algunas de las respuestas en el panel del año pasado con las que estuvo Mariano y Andrea.
Muy bueno Code Rush, la verdad.
No se lo pierdan.
Sí, así que
súper interesante,
damos
chicos.
lugar a la charla de Tara, por favor no se lo pierdan y hagan las preguntas. Vamos a nerdear.
Code itself is the underlying thing that makes computers work. Why is it important to the world? It's because it's the blood of the organism that's our culture now. It makes everything go.
This very small set of people is really defining what our world's going to be like. I mean, the computer becoming ubiquitous and the way we interact with the world more and more mediated through the computer is this very small group of people defining what that world's going to be like.
One of the key lessons of Code Rush is that the revolution can happen, but it is not going to happen in a place that is so established.
Right.
Where you do have those lockdowns, right? The rest of industry finally caught up to high-tech industry, which is why companies like Google or Amazon or Apple, et cetera. But there's the new companies, the up-and-comers, and those are where the revolutions are going to happen again, just like they happened at Netscape.
I've been at Netscape for 3.5 years, and it feels like forever. AOL's focus and Netscape's growing focus has been marketing and advertising and all that stuff, and that's not nearly as interesting to someone who's sort of a techno-fetishist.
Yeah, the things that I did back in the day, I'd probably be arrested for now. But, And the hockey stick actually wasn't even my best weapon. We were still on the Middlefield campus, the client engineering team, and we had an intern. And we had a global symbol table that was so large, if you're into this sort of thing, that we actually had custom compilers on some of our platforms because it would run out of heap space. And so there was a file, it was a header file, and we told the interns never touch this file, right? If you touch this file, you break everything. And the intern touched it and broke everything, and we went and told him, never touch that again. And he broke it again, and we're like, really, we mean it, do not touch this file again. Third time, I go in, and it wasn't the hockey stick, it was, there's a Japanese practice sword called a shinai. It's made out of bamboo.
Yes.
And when you hit somebody with it, it slaps, right?
Yes.
I went in there, I was so angry, I hadn't slept for days. Okay. I go in there and I just swing and I knock his computer monitor, his keyboard, this pile of Coke cans, everything onto the floor. And I said, if you touch that file again, I'm going to kill you. I literally said these words. Now, why I was not fired, I will never know.
No. We're doomed.
Tara. Yeah, what's your doctor say, Tara?
My doctor said,
Mylanta.
interestingly enough, that I worked too much. And that if I went to work today after my appointment, he would personally kill me.
I have an agreement with myself that by the time I'm 35, I'm either going to be a high school teacher or a bartender, but anything other than a position in a high-tech industry. Otherwise, I'll probably die by the time I'm 40.
I think for me, the biggest thing, and this is someone who's been a manager for, since Netscape, I never stopped. Netscape as a company, we made the decision that we were going to work ourselves to death. We were working 100-hour plus weeks.
That decision was made for me.
Yeah, well, I mean, we all made.
I wasn't there. I wasn't there on that day, so I must have not
I don't
got the
remember.
memo.
I've got a blank.
Yeah, I meant the corporation made a decision. We're going to work ourselves to death, and we all bought into it. We did it, right? That was probably the biggest, for myself personally, the biggest lesson I took away, which is I'm never doing that again, and I refuse to let that happen again.
Bueno, bienvenidos, bienvenidas. Llegó el momento, la última charla del día en nuestra Fireside Chat con Tara Hernandez. Así que bueno, la verdad es un gustazo para nosotros, es una panzada poder tener una charla con una persona en tecnología de este nivel. Así que bueno, les comento, obviamente esta charla va a ser en inglés, así que ya ahora yo tengo algunas preguntitas acá, pero vayan poniendo sus preguntas en Swapcard. Las pueden poner en inglés o en español, no hay problema, yo las traduzco. Así que bueno, sin más preámbulos, no vamos a perder más tiempo y ahora voy a pasar a inglés para hablar con Tara. ¿Sí? Hey Tara, can you hear me? Hello, welcome.
Yo entiendo una o dos palabras con cada 5 o 6 palabras.
Just a little bit, yeah. Unless, for my weird Argentinian accent, yes. So thank you for joining us again here at Netrearla. So we're very, very happy to have you. So this is just a fireside chat with you. So let's just go straight to the questions and just have a chat, okay?
Sounds awesome.
Good. So I'll start with the first one that I have right here. Do you feel like the new browsers created in the last couple of years follow the same ideas and principles you had when you started Netscape back in the day?
Oh, good question. And to be clear, I did not start Netscape. I was a peon.
Well, you kind of did.
I was a little cog
a little
in the
bit.
wheel. I think that it's been a battle. Right. So you think about how in Netscape at the end when we launched Mozilla.org and we made the browser open source. An example, Google was an early, a huge investor in that idea of an open source browser, and as were other companies in particular, to make sure to balance out the power of Microsoft at the time from dominating the browser market so that the internet could, and everyone's experience of that could be as open as possible. Subsequently, of course, Apple created Safari, Google eventually created Chrome. Chrome is also open source. But you can kind of see that tension ongoing where it's you know, are we funneling too many things through the browser to commercial interests? And I think that continues to be an interesting challenge that we have as an industry, because ultimately we really do need the browsers to be as open as possible, to enable us to do whatever it is we need to do, and not have one company control too much of our experience of the World Wide Web.
Great, yeah, and everyone should watch that Courage documentary. That's what we've been sharing with our audience as well. So, next question that I have here: what would you say today to the person you were in the past? Would you do anything differently?
I'd sleep more. Honestly, I worked way too hard, way too much, and when you get that tired, it's not even, the fact that you're working is no longer a benefit. You're making mistakes, you're making bad decisions, and it's not necessary. You know, it really isn't. At the end of the day, no matter how important it is that we feel what we're doing, it's just a job. Go home.
Yeah, how much did you sleep during that code rush part? Like,
not a lot. I mean, we have. In fact, I was just explaining this recently. We had this tradition that started up after, or as part of that process, because we weren't going home. We would stay night after night, and which means that we weren't sleeping in our own beds. We weren't putting on clean clothes. We weren't bathing. You know, so we started like, okay, we got to go home and take showers and put on clean, nice clothes and pretend to be human. And that just basically, and putting on too many nice clothes was too complicated, so it just turned into tie Fridays. So you could be wearing a t-shirt and a tie, or a dress shirt and a tie, and we just have a tie. And I've worn a tie on Friday ever since, which people kind of stare at me funny, but whatever, it's a fun tradition.
Great. I have a question from the audience here, from Sebastian. Have you tried Vivaldi browser? They're quite innovative. Reminds me of that time where Firefox and Opera were delivering new experiences with every single release.
You know, someone was just asking me about this, and I haven't tried it yet, but I just found out about it, and I was going to take a look to see what's going on there. I like the fact that there are still companies out there or projects out there to try and make more browsers. I think that's a good thing.
Great. I have a next question from Horacio, and this one is in Spanish, so let me translate it in my head for a second. Would you have achieved the same outcome with a different organization and less pressure?
Well, so that's an interesting question. So if by the same outcome, meaning would we have released the source code by a particular date and time? Maybe, maybe not, hard to say. But if you think about, at the end of the day, the desired outcome was about bringing all of these open source developers and saving Netscape. That was the original purpose of making the Netscape Navigator open source. And so we failed at that. Netscape's dead. You know, AOL bought it. It was ramped down. It was basically turned into like a vanity domain. You know, it was dead, honestly, even before the writing was on the wall, even before we launched Mozilla.org. So from that perspective, it was an abject failure. But the more important thing to me and to a lot of us who killed ourselves to get that open source out there is that we preserved the idea of this of the browser that wasn't Internet Explorer, that wasn't.
I think we have a little audio problem. Creo que tenemos un problemita de audio. Un segundito, por favor.
There was nothing that AOL could do. Oh, sorry.
Disculpen, un segundito, ya estamos tratando. Esto es tecnología, así que deme un minutito. Tara, if you can hear me, just hanging there 1 second. We're having a little bit audio issue. Okay. Esto es CISARMI, esto es así. Así que deme un segundito que estamos tratando de resolverlo y ya volvemos con Tara. Okay. Mientras tanto, sigan mandando sus preguntas, ¿sí? Acá al Swapcard. Total, esta es una charla informal, así que tenemos tiempo, ¿ok? If you can hear me, Tara, we're still trying to solve it. Just so please hang in there. I cannot hear you. So great. Thank you. This is IT. Something always happens. Estamos de vuelta. Ahí está, perdón. Estas cosas siempre pasan, así que bueno, ya retomamos el audio. Tara, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Great. Do you remember the last thing you were saying?
Whether or not we would have been successful
Exactly.
under different circumstances.
Exactly,
Yes. Yeah. How much did you hear?
Well, I think you were talking about that Netscape, eventually it was a failure, right? I mean...
Yeah, we didn't actually succeed.
Yeah.
Right? Because the point was to save Netscape, the company, and that failed. But what we did save, which I think was more important, was a free browser that enabled the World Wide Web experience to continue to not be controlled by one single company. So in that part, we succeeded. And I think that could have happened any number of ways.
Okay. We're going to the next question from the audience. Fernando asks, what do you think are the most interesting projects going on right now in the IT world? I'd like to know her opinion on crypto. Oh, and I have some very strong opinions on the Web3. So let's get it started, okay?
All right. Oh, we bring it. We bring it. Crypto. Okay. So let us separate. There's two things, I think. There's blockchain.
Okay.
Right. And the idea of a truly irrevocable source of truth about a piece of information. Mm-hmm. I have no problems with this. I think it's a great idea. That is separate from cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin or Ethereum or whatever, which I think is a crock, honestly. Okay. I think it is a terrible idea, and I discourage people from participating in that. And the reason is, one, it's not regulated, and as we can see, many, many people are losing their shirts in this. And two, it is because the technology around things like blockchain hasn't really settled yet. It's not that safe yet. What we're doing right now is we're throwing a lot of money to try and make the systems better. But they're not where they can be, and I think they'll probably end up in some years in the future. But yeah, right there, that's a disaster. It's not a disaster waiting to happen. It's already happening.
Yeah, me too.
So I'm not a fan.
I know, and I have the same opinions as you. I'm sorry if the audience thinks otherwise. NFTs, we can go all day about that, right? Yeah. So anyway, let's move on to the next question.
But, you know, your opinion, my opinion, and $5 get you a cup of coffee, right? So everybody's going to make their own choice there.
That's a great one, yeah. So next question from Nicholas. What do you think of the decline of Firefox losing more than 45 million users? With the absolute reign of Chrome, we are in the new era like when Internet Explorer decided how we see the web.
Yeah, and this is really interesting. As you know, and I was recently a Google employee, so you know, I don't have any interesting insights to share from that. But the Chrome ecosystem is so incredibly pervasive, right? And this is what I was talking about earlier about that tension of it is open source, good. Mm-hmm. You know, Chromium is open source browser, but the ecosystem is really kind of dialed in towards sending eyeballs to Google services, right? And so, you know, it's by default, you go to google.com for search, which means you get the ads. There's a bazillion plugins that make it really easy to use. What do they call it? It used to be called G Suite. Now it's called Workspaces, right? It's just kind of like they make it really easy to get into that ecosystem. Is it as evil as the old style Microsoft or AOL or whatever? You have to pay money and then you can't go outside. No. But it's something to keep an eye on, right? And I think that one of the things the Mozilla Foundation has helped with in the Electronic Frontier Foundation, the EFF, has helped with, is to make sure that as much as you, as a business, try and get more business, because that's what you do, that you don't make it impossible for other people to play. So a lot of people, they set up Chrome, but then they use DuckDuckGo, right? Or they use some other search engine. Or if they really want to have fun, they'll use Bing, because that's sort of ironic. And so I think as consumers of these services, we really need to be conscious, and we need to take ownership of what we are doing when we use these services, right? There's this joke that we say, I'm sure there's a Spanish version of it, but in English we say, if you're not paying for the product, you are the product.
Right.
Right? And it's absolutely true, right? I actually pay for a private email service. I have a Gmail account and everybody can find it, right? But I have another private service. I pay to keep it private because that's the only way I can maintain privacy. And so I think the internet has become a lot more complicated. And it's upon us as consumers and hopefully upon us as employees working for companies to try and find the most ethical and honorable way to exist from a business perspective. Because Lord knows it's really easy to get evil really fast, as we've seen many examples of.
Yeah, DuckDuckGo fan here, by the way. So.
Oh yeah, it's a great search engine.
Yeah, let's go to the next question from Diego. This is a throwback for you. So, what was the biggest learned from Code Rush?
I think there was a couple of things. One, that everybody is important, right? I think there was, to this day, I think there's this tendency for people to think about high-tech industry, and you're really important if you're an executive, or you're really important if you're a software engineer, or maybe you're really important because you're a really good sales person. The fact of the matter is that everybody's important. And the reason that there are roles that exist at high-tech companies is because they're necessary. And so understanding how all of those people can come together and achieve something that is, under normal circumstances, unachievable, I think is a really important lesson. We would not have been able to do what we did unless we had the IT department keeping our desktops going, or the mailroom, handling those incoming packages, or the marketing people who were helping, organize priorities of different deliverables. Like, that idea that everybody can bring something valuable to the table, I think, is really important. So you don't have to be a programmer to be in high tech, right? You could be a trainer, you could be a technical writer, right? All of those things have value, and a good company will recognize that and be a good place to work for that reason.
Great. Next question. This is a tricky one, and this is a very interesting question from Horacio. He's wondering if you were affected by the dot-com bubble in the 2000s, and how did you handle that time?
Okay. Oh, man. Okay, so after I left Netscape, I went to a little startup. I was number 15, and a little startup called Blue Martini, and it's gone now, right, as so many startups were. And I started there in 1998, and we went public. And it was a good IPO. We went public. That was early 2001, I think. I don't remember. It's been a while. And when the day we went public, everybody ran to look at their stock. And all right, if we could sell now, what would it be worth? And I was worth $7 million.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, so when you're an employee who at a company, and you're just an employee, you're not one of the executives, you can't sell stock right away. They call it a blackout.
Yeah.
The employees are not allowed to sell stock right away. I think it was 6 months. We had a 6-month blackout. In month 4 or 5 is when the bubble burst, that big bubble in 2001. I went from 7 million to 70,000 in about a week.
Wow.
It was like, well, I was an internet millionaire on paper once.
That's a nice story to tell, right?
Oh man, that still hurts. Which is why if people say, "Oh, I'm going to go to this startup, and they're not going to really pay me anything, but I'm going to get a lot of equity," I'm like, nope, don't do it. I mean, equity is fine, but equity should not be. They should not offer you equity instead of salary ever. Nobody should ever try to do that anymore. You get paid.
Yeah, wise advice. Next one from Hugo, and he says, sorry for the question, but he asks, what happened to Firefox OS?
Firefox OS? Gosh. I was never part of that.
Oh, okay.
I had long since moved out of because there was like a mobile OS.
Yeah,
I think
something
that's
like
what
that.
he's asking about. Yeah, I was never really interested in that. And I'll tell you why. It's because I wasn't a mobile developer. I just wanted everything to work. So I will admit, I give a lot of money to Apple Computer. Everything just works. I'm sure that's wrong, but I have other things that I put effort into.
Yeah, great. So following up on that, do you still participate in open source projects?
I do. Though what I'm doing these days is I'm part of the Continuous Delivery Foundation. So this was, if you remember in CodeRush, there was the tinderbox.
Yeah.
The way that we kept track of whether or not the build compiled. Okay, so that whole idea of continuous integration, continuous delivery, continuous deployment, the idea of pipeline, that's still the area that I'm the most interested in. And so there's a foundation, the Continuous Delivery Foundation. It's part of the Linux Foundation. And I work on that, and I write a lot of papers, and I give talks, and I don't really code anymore. It's not as interesting to me. But I help with logistics and organization and, I don't know, old people things.
Nah, that's great. There's a time for everything, right? So
there is.
Yeah. Next one. So following up on this, do you have a project you can recommend to someone who is just starting into coding or open source? Let's say someone who just is watching this and he says, "Oh, I want to get involved into an open source project." Do you have any tips for starters, something like that?
Well, I can't really recommend one project because it really depends. But here's what I would recommend thinking about. What are you most interested in? There are so many different ways you can get involved. Are you interested in compilers? Right? You could actually work on the Go programming language or JavaScript or Python or Perl. Nobody should work on Perl anymore. But there's tons of programming languages. If you're like a language nerd, you can go start contributing there. Or maybe you like games. Right? And maybe you like really nerdy math stuff. There's OpenUSD, which is a open source graphics library that was released by Pixar. Actually, I was there when they started working on it. And it's used by a lot of the studios. It's used by NVIDIA. There's an opportunity to get involved in some really interesting graphics related things. If you like mobile development, right? There are a lot of open source mobile platforms. I think Flutter might be.
Yes.
But you can look around and find the community that you are most interested in participating with. Okay, now that you've identified that, here's the way to look at projects. Any project you belong to should have a code of conduct that is published.
Very important.
They should have a contributors. Very important. They should have a contributors guide. A good project will have, if you look at GitHub or GitLab, they should have tags that say, you're new to the project. This is a good first issue you could take on, or good for beginners. They actually engage the community and are inviting of new contributors. And they will, when you go to the repository, they'll have all kinds of how to get started, right? If you join a project that doesn't have any of those things, you're not likely to have as good a time. Because they're going to treat you as if you're a waste of time, that you're bothering them. And that's not, why would you spend your time not being respected, right? You're there to learn and to help. And good communities will recognize that and support you.
Great. And following on open source, and we actually had a really great discussion yesterday with Maddock about the future of open source, and we discussed, like, for example, what happened with COVID-19 and open science. So what do you think it will be the future of open source?
That's a really good question. I have been thinking about that recently because there's another joke that I think you've probably seen around. It's a cartoon. There's a xkcd.com.
Oh, big fan of
XKCD. Yeah. Right, and so there's this one cartoon he has where there's this huge pile of really complicated looking machinery that represents some enterprise platform, and then there's that little piece that's like open source guy in Nebraska, right? That if that guy goes away, the whole thing falls over, right? So that's true. There are a lot of open source projects that, by their nature, have become kind of critical to certain areas of high-tech industry, and then when they blow up, things fall over in really expensive ways. NPM, right? Going back to JavaScript. So there's the NPM package system. That guy was like, I'm taking all my toys and I'm leaving. I'm going home. And he patched in some, what was it, LeftPad, some bogus module, and he blew up half the internet, right? There was another one. What was I think it was a couple of weeks ago. Probably. I can't keep track. It keeps happening, right? So in that regard, that's not going to hold, right? And I think that it is fair for the industry as a whole to identify, hey, something is important, to have a mechanism for identifying that something's important, and then to actually figure out what is a model that we can compensate these open source maintainers in a way that makes sense, both because it's ethically the right thing to do, but also because it's important. The Linux Foundation exists because a whole bunch of companies recognized, hey, if we want to be able to have a freely available Unix-style operating system without having to pay out the nose to AT&T that was holding that license, or we want to have operating systems that are not controlled by Microsoft, we better figure this out. So they created the Linux Foundation, and then everybody gave it money so that Linus and all of the other folks could get paid to maintain Linux. Google last year started paying for the Python Foundation to have a developer work on it full time, right? So I think that's where something like the Linux Foundation or the Apache Foundation is really important. It's like, let's have these foundations identify what are the critical things, and then coordinate getting members to put in funds so that we can turn around and pay the maintainers, so that we don't have that poor schlep in Nebraska suddenly decide, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm not getting paid. I have other things I can do, right? I think that's a very necessary change that will continue to be something that evolves. Because the other reason is, you have stuff like, this cryptocurrency, or you have other security related things, or you have, I don't know, any number of topics where you have banks that are inadvertently pulling in these modules, and they may not understand, where did this come from, right? Because open source isn't going to go away. The ecosystems are tightly coupled, right? Mostly due to the Linux operating system being the main driver of services. So I think people who are really interested in the mechanics of how this works, go into corporate law and intellectual property law, and then get a business degree, because we need smart people to actually be focused on what should this look like 5 years from now, 10 years from now. So I think this is there's a lot of abuse and a lot of mistakes and a lot of really complicated challenges in this area, and I think it's a great opportunity for someone to come in here and be a hero, because we need you as an industry.
And on top of that, I think those who work at IT companies, I think there should be a way for us to encourage our companies as well to get involved and also give some money, because that's eventually what these projects need, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, someone will probably come up with a new form of license that says, because right now the license, like Mozilla Public License, was in Berkeley license, they were the first to kind of say, hey, you don't have to be like GPL. You don't have to expose your intellectual property just because you're using this library, this tool, right? But they didn't necessarily charge you for it right away because no one was going to charge it. You wanted your module to get out there. Well, now I think we're ready for a new version of open source licenses that says, if you are, a certain size of company, you should start paying. And actually, now that I think about it, Docker just did that. Right? So Docker is open source, right? And you get pull the command line tool. The license says, though, if you download their tools, if you are a company bigger than 10 employees or something, or have more than $1 million in annual revenue, you have to pay a license. I think that's going to become much more prevalent. And I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
I think that's actually absolutely the right thing to do.
Great. And I have a couple of questions here because this version of this conference is aimed for junior talent, right? People who are just getting started at IT. Do you work with a bunch of junior people? Do you foster how do we foster their talent? What's your insight on that?
Oh gosh. Of course, I was at Google for 4 years. Google hires every year thousands of interns and new college grads. That's great, but it's like a small piece of the puzzle. The organization that I was part of at Google also had a relationship with a boot camp. And so we would actually bring in a couple of boot camp graduates a year, and it was a far smaller program, but it was incredibly successful. Because I think you don't want to just focus on new college, you want to focus on career transitioners. Someone comes in with 10 years of life experience, they just happen to be new at tech, that's still a very valuable contributor to your company. So I think having a lot of flexibility in how you think about bringing in new talent, regardless of age or educational background, I think is really important. And I always tell you folks, it's like, those internships can be hard to come by. Right? For every person who gets an internship at Google, there's 100 people who didn't, right? Or times Microsoft, times Amazon, whatever. So open source projects can be an awesome place for you to develop those skills while you're looking for that first internship or you're looking for that first job. But again, going back to make sure they have a code of conduct, make sure they're community support, that kind of stuff, right? I think that's a great place. You don't even have to have gone to school. If you're just someone who's self-directed and just wants to figure stuff out, why not? I think smart leadership recognizes that people can come from all walks of life. And so we have to get more creative and become more inclusive of how we think about reaching out to various people. And that's something I firmly believe. And at my new company, I've started at MongoDB a couple months ago. I already started talking to them, like, what are we doing to bring in new people who aren't just coming through this intern program? The intern program is great. I love it. Fabulous, but it's like one piece, and there are other ways that we can approach that. So there's a lot of people out there, I think, that are thinking about this problem.
Yeah, and I see that a lot here.
And in particular, think about like worldwide, we're all going global now, right? MongoDB started out as an open source project, is now a global company. It's got offices all over the world. And the two big continents that people are really excited about investing are Latin America and Africa. Like, a lot of people don't understand that Nairobi now is a tech hub, right? It's crazy. Buenos Aires, Rio, there's a lot of stuff going on there. Google is now putting cables. I think there was a new cable going into Chile a couple of years ago, right? So high-tech industry is truly a global phenomenon. And here are all these people who live in South America, who are, getting trained, and who are future employees and future customers, right? And so the smart companies are down there, and as well as Africa, and like, what are we doing? How can we be part of this? There's a guy I met when I was working at Google who's part of a company called Nubank, which I think is in Brazil.
I think that's in Argentina, but I know it. Yes.
Oh, is that? Okay, so I was talking to this guy, Renan Cepaverde, and he was the director of the cloud infrastructure for them, and he and I were talking, and he was so excited about all of the emerging fintech in South America, and he's like, we just need slightly better network connectivity. Like, all right.
Yes, we do.
So Godspeed.
Great. So following up on that, because I see that a lot here, what you just mentioned about diverse talent, that, for example, someone who transitions, I don't know, I've been a carpenter for 10 years. I don't know, I've been working in banking, HR, and now I'm getting into IT. I started to study programming, And there's a lot of insecurity about like this whole thing of being junior at 35, you know, the concept of a junior talent is supposed to be someone young, which is actually not, right? And they don't actually take into consideration all the previous background. So what would you say to these people?
That's tough. You know, it is tough. I would say that there's a growing recognition that career transitioners bring unique value.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to find the right company.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, one way when you really don't know where to start is the first thing is you start which boot camp program do you choose, right? A good boot camp program does not charge you a ton of money for tuition, because then again, you know, you're the product. They make their money on the tuition.
Yeah.
Other programs, they don't charge you, they get paid by the companies that they're placing candidates. So their business model is rewarded by the successful placement of their students into jobs, and then the company pays them. So the company we worked at Google is an example of that.
Mm-hmm.
They did not charge tuition to their students. It was harder to get into that program, but they were incentivized for placement. And we had people come in through this program who came in as junior engineers, and at Google, by the time I left, at least 4 or 5 of them had made senior engineer at Google. So that's 2 promotions, from junior to engineer, from regular engineer to senior engineer. And they did that the same process as somebody who had a master's degree at an elite university, right? And so to me, people who are not looking at career transitioners are missing out on some outstanding employees. And I think more and more companies are starting to recognize that.
Yeah, that's
here's the other thing. There are more jobs than there are job seekers. It's just trying to match where are the job seekers and where are the jobs. COVID-19 has kind of helped with that, because now the industry is like, okay, maybe this, you know, you don't have to be in the office because we just spent 2 years not being in the office. So that's an opportunity. But time zones, that becomes a challenge. You know, there's no good way for me in the West Coast United States to have a decent work-life balance when have to talk to somebody who's in India. That's 12 and a half hours, right?
Yeah.
Somebody's either up early or up late.
Yeah.
That's the only limitation.
Right. So Tara, I think unfortunately that's all the time we have today. So again, me and I want to also join all the audience, everyone that is watching. We want to thank you so much for being here with us. It's very rare for us to share, you know, this moment with someone who is a legend in IT. That's how we see it. So, yes.
Hardly.
Own it. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I just want to tell you, I was talking to some coworkers. You know, my father's family is from Mexico. I was talking to a coworker. His family's from Ecuador. Another one's from Puerto Rico, and we were all bemoaning the fact that our families came to the United States and then they wouldn't speak Spanish to us. So, and now we're all very regretful and we speak terrible Spanish. So if you guys come to the United States, make sure your kids speak Spanish. It's a global world now.
All right. Tara, thank you again so much for joining us, and I hope we can see you some other time, all right? Have a lovely day.
Good luck. Thank you.
Bueno, se terminó.